Hello, hello. Welcome back for another episode, everyone. Thank you so much for continuing to listen to the show. I have on another guest. Surprise, surprise. Somebody that I met through the space of an intimacy professionals group. Had a couple of people already from that group on, so I'm excited to welcome yet another. This is Dr. Holly Wood. Yes, you heard that right. Dr. Hollywood. First name Holly, last name Wood. Love, love, love that. As soon as I met her, I followed her on social media and I was like, oh, I love her vibe. I love her energy. I love what she's talking about. And so I had to have her on the show. A little bit about her. So, Dr. Wood is a highly respected expert in the field of sex therapy with a PhD in human sexuality, certification as an AASECT certified sex therapist, and board certification as a clinical sexologist through the American Board of Sexology. Dr. Holly blends her deep expertise with a warm, inclusive approach. She spent years helping individuals and couples navigate the complexities of sexual health, intimacy, trauma recovery, and relationships, offering evidence-based insights in a way that's both engaging and easy to understand. And Dr. Holly is passionate about creating safe, judgment-free spaces for exploring sexuality and empowering people to embrace their authentic selves. And I'm really excited. This is a topic that we haven't talked about a while on the show. But if you remember in the past, I had Bree Carey on the show. This is probably about 2 years ago now. Gosh, we've been podcasting for 5 years. That's insane. I've had Brie Carey, and I think that was like the last kind of like parent specific conversation that we had, like an episode that was very focused on parenting and intimacy as a parent. So this will be a nice refresh with a little bit of a different perspective on it. I know Dr. Wood is a recent new mom herself, and so she can share her story once she pops on, but she has some personal grit behind this topic, right? Like she can share from those personal experiences around how intimacy can really change and it might start to look different once becoming a parent. And as we know from time and time again, as we've heard on the show from others and that I've heard from clients in my space, intimacy sometimes can just completely fall off the cliff of your life once becoming a parent. And hoping this episode can shed some light on that and to bring a little bit of spark back into your parent life and to your sex life. So without further ado, let's let her on into the show. Let's get the show on the road. And thank you again for continuing to listen. If you haven't yet rated this podcast, I super appreciate that. This is the rating is a way for a podcast to get more listeners and more views. And as you know, these topics that I talk about on the show are very near and dear to me. And so I want as many people in the world that can hear this as possible. So give it a like, give it a share, subscribe, whether you're listening on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Pandora, Amazon, Audible, whatever it is. I super again appreciate you all. Thank you so much. All right, I'm gonna stop babbling now. Let's bring in Dr. Holly. All right, Dr. Holly, thank you so much for coming onto the show today.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me.
Yes, where is it that you're from right now again?
If I'm in San Clemente, so South Orange County, California.
Oh, okay. Cool. Very cool. And is Wood your married name or did you grow up as a Wood?
I grew up as a Wood and I
Oh my
was
gosh.
kind enough to give my partner a hyphen. So now it's technically Wood hyphen Ramirez. But I
Yeah,
kept that name.
that is awesome. I mean, it's very signature. It's very, I love it. Yeah, I'm sure there was a lot of jokes that you've heard around this as a kid growing up. And but yeah, now I think as a business professional, just what a statement.
Yeah, I was unsure if about the level of seriousness that it would present me with, but hoping that my professionalism and my skill would shine through.
Mhm. Yes, as it does. And I recorded in your bio, just telling people already just your vibe on social media, the way that you present yourself, the way that you're talking about these things. I love your reels, I love your content. And yeah, again, I will plug your information at the end, but definitely give Dr. Holly a follow, you guys, after listening to this.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. All right, so we're getting into parenting, which before we hit record, you have a lot of experiences. You said you had some bonus kids that are older, and then you got a little
Mhm.
one. So tell
Mhm.
us, we're talking intimacy. Tell us why is this topic? Why did you choose to speak about this on the show today?
I'm experienced and trained in the whole gamut of sex therapy, but I think something that's just been really present for me is intimacy as a parent and continuing to nurture and cultivate my relationship while trying to nurture and build my family. So I think this is something really important. I think a lot of couples kind of get so caught up in the parenting piece that the other stuff, the intimacy, the connection with their partner kind of falls to the wayside. So for
Mhm.
me, it's just really important to talk about both, especially because eventually, I mean, hopefully our kids, they grow up, they become successful themselves, they start having their own families, and then they leave the
Mhm.
home, and then we're back with just our partners. So ideally, we have
Yeah.
cultivated that relationship enough that we still have something to connect over once the kids leave.
Absolutely. And yeah, I think they're often like the saying goes after marriage, your sex life goes out the window, which we know in our profession, right? We can debunk that, no problem. But I think the same goes with parenting. And I'm finding a lot of people, right, with my age, a lot of people are having kids. Kids are now going into school, and just there's so many transition periods that I think a parent goes through, and then how your intimacy shifts throughout that. But I think for a lot of women, and maybe sometimes men too, but mostly for women, after having the kid, right, you got to go through some identity crisis, and maybe aren't feeling as sexy or free or right, like alive in your body after that time.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think it's interesting. I've been through so many different stages, right? So I do have two bonus kids who are a little bit older, but when they came into my life, right, the youngest one was 15 and always lived with us,
Hmm.
right? My husband was the primary parent and caregiver, so I even in our the entire relationship with my partner, we've always had kids there. And then
Hmm.
once those ones got older and moved out, we got pregnant. So I went from having teens in the home and trying to figure out, okay, how do we, how do we make sure that we make time for us and also don't like expose our kids to things that they don't want to hear and we don't want them to hear. And then how do we then going through couple different stages with pregnancy, right? Going through being pregnant and how do I feel about my body, right? My body is changing dramatically. How is this impacting our sex life? How is the hormonal shifts that you
Hmm.
experience during pregnancy impacting your sex life? Unfortunately, we experienced pregnancy loss, which had a significant impact on our sex life all the way to getting pregnant again and getting to a place where I have a 1.5 year old in a age child. So trying to navigate intimacy with one that's just running around everywhere. So lots of different stages that parents go through that shifts their experience
Hmm.
of intimacy with their partner, whether it's because of the biological things happening, the psychological things happening, like you said, kind of coming into
Hmm.
this new role of what it means to be a parent, what it means to be a stepmother to a mother, right? To a mother from older kids to younger kids. Those are kind of different
Hmm.
roles that I played. And so there's so many different shifts that happen biologically, psychologically, and relationally, um, that it's a journey to navigate your
Yeah.
intimacy as a parent, as a caretaker.
Yeah. So given that you've kind of at all age levels at this point, right? You've gone through the newborn phase, the toddler phase, teenage phase, grown adult phase. What would you say if you kind of look back on intimacy? What would you say you notice are the differences between that and like how you navigated intimacy based on the kids' ages?
Yeah, yeah. Mm. I think with pregnancy, there's a lot of differences in mechanics, right? Like, and your body is different. Like, how do we do this mechanically? I think there's a difference psychologically, how you feel in that your body has changed so much, right? I think uh, especially as women, we carry so much emotional weight around our bodies. And so to see our bodies shift so dramatically can really take a toll on us and have us questioning, am I still attracted attractive, excuse me, to
Mm-hmm.
my partner? Does my partner still find me attractive in this body that is a different shape? And holding space for the discomfort in the changing body while also holding space for like my body's doing this incredible, amazing thing. Like it's creating a life right now. And um, it doesn't necessarily have to be sexy, but it can still be sexy, even in a
Mm-hmm.
different shaped body. So I think that was like a big focal point of that stage. Once having a little one, like the toddler stage, it's really about when do we have time for
Mm-hmm.
this,
Mm-hmm.
right? How can you be intentional about the time that you have, right? Do you get more scheduled or regimented because, okay, the baby's napping now, maybe now's a time that we can actually spend together as a couple, or, when the baby goes to sleep, or when we're lucky enough to get some supported childcare. So I think there's a lot of intentionality that has to
Mm-hmm.
be done around that stage to actually make time, not just for the sex part, but for the like dating
Mm-hmm.
and like
Yeah.
just being humans again beyond just parents. That comes in that stage. And then with the older teen stage, um, I think the impact on us, on couples, I think it's more so around like if you have kids in the home who are old enough to know what sex is, right?
Mm-hmm.
Again, you don't want to expose them to anything. So again, I guess it's about being intentional, right? Taking
Mm-hmm.
advantage of time when your kids are not in the home is really helpful. Um, but also, you're at the stage where like your your kids are starting to have questions and explore
Right.
their own sexualities. And so being able to, I think, be close with your teenagers in a way that they feel comfortable to ask you questions. It's like a whole new change in parenting. So it's less of the focus on what is my relationship with my partner, but okay, now how do I raise sexually healthy adult children?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And as you're speaking, the words, like you use the word intentional a lot, which I think is so important, right? Like being intentional with the time. And then creative is another word that I was like coming up when you were speaking, and during pregnancy, getting creative with positions, managing time, managing emotions, right?
Mm-hmm.
Newborn, toddler phase. Again, like creativity of planning the time, scheduling the time, maybe. And I've had conversations on the show too around scheduling intimacy, and not everybody likes that but sometimes
Yeah.
that's where we're at, and my episode
Mm-hmm.
specifically on this is around how to make that sexy. Um,
Mm-hmm.
but when you were speaking to, I want to say one thing I'm finding a lot with clients and again friends that are in the parenting space and trying to navigate intimacy is that when they are having the time, let's say kid is napping or they have the sitter or they have weekend to themselves, it's the pure exhaustion that they're feeling. It's like the last
Mm-hmm.
thing I'm thinking about right now is sex or to be intimate. It's like I just want to sleep.
Mm-hmm.
I just want to catch up on my own self-care, or I might need some individual space to where I'm not needed by somebody. So how
Mm-hmm.
can you speak to that a little bit? Like, how does somebody find the balance between pouring back into themselves versus pouring back into the relationship?
Yeah, that's a really great point, and I think it's important to honor that there are going to be times like I'm the first person to say, as a sex therapist, sex isn't going to be the most important thing in your life most of the time, and that is okay. So taking space to like honor, like if your body needs to rest, then
Mhm.
listen to your body and let your body rest. What I really like how you said is like finding a balance between pouring into yourself and pouring into your relationship, because I think that's important to think of as opposed to thinking of, you know, sex or intimacy as like, I got to check off this box because this is,
Mhm.
the one of those things that they say you need to do to maintain your relationship, right? But it's like, really, how can I pour into that relationship? I think about it as like investments. Rest is an investment in yourself, and sometimes you're
Mhm.
going to want to stay or need to stay in bed all day, and you have to think about that not as like losing out on time or productivity, but an investment in yourself. And the same thing with setting aside intentional time with your partner, whether it's through dating or cuddling, right? It doesn't have to
Hmm.
be, oh gosh, I have to like put on this sexy lingerie and do like the whole thing to try and like put on this event that is sex. But it's like, can we cuddle together? Are there other ways to be intimate that are investing in my relationship for long-term gain?
Hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And when when we were speaking on this too, communication is something else that I think comes up around this. So for couples to be able to communicate and, as you just said, sort of normalize that sex isn't going to be the top priority for a lot of the times. Again, that word creative comes up around really broadening the scope of what intimacy means, because it's not just sex, right? You mentioned cuddling, hand holding, quality time together. And I think that's important as well. And so two things I wanted to go down. I wanted to ask, like, what would your definition be of intimacy? And then I wanted to definitely go into communication prompts for couples, or how would you suggest a couple navigates the topic of intimacy after parenting?
Yeah, absolutely. So, intimacy, um, to me, as far as a definition, is like closeness and vulnerability, right? There's a
Hmm.
level of emotional closeness, there's a level of physical closeness, and you have to be vulnerable together. I think sexual intimacy then is like specifically related to the sexual realm, but there are lots of different
Hmm.
ways to be intimate and emotionally close with someone. And something I really like to do is have couples sit together and create like an intimacy menu, right? And just like a food menu, like sometimes you have the time and the energy and the space to have a full course, beautiful meal. And sometimes you only have time for like a hot pocket. And is it the most like nutritionally dense thing for you? No, but it gets the job done in a pinch. And so I think of physical and sexual intimacy in the same way, right? So an intimacy menu, right? I like to think of being creative together. What kind of
Hmm.
things would you put on your menu? Could there be things like just coming home from work and embracing each other? Could it be things like holding hands, cuddling on the couch, a massage, um, a quickie, or like a full on kinky bondage scene if you have time and energy for that or want to do that that day? Like a nice full list of things. And that way you can kind of pick and choose what you have time, what you have energy for, and what you are desiring at that
Hmm.
time. So
Hmm.
that I think is a really fun, playful, creative way to do that. When it comes to ways for couples to communicate about this stuff, like questions and prompts, I love doing what I call like a weekly couples meeting or like a
Hmm.
couples CEO meeting. And I have like a little prompt for that too on my website if folks wanted it. But essentially, you're scheduling one time a week where the two of you sit down and you go over different things, starting with where you two are at emotionally, right? How have you been
Hmm.
feeling this week? Is there anything unresolved from this past week that you'd like to talk about? How can I make you feel more loved this week? What do I appreciate most about you this week, right? Sharing
Hmm.
those things on an emotionally intimate level. And then talking about some things that are kind of like logistic, right?
Hmm.
What kids going to school this week? What are the extracurricular activities that we have to plan around? Who's coming to the house this week? Do you have a work meeting we need to schedule around? Right.
Hmm.
And then also like date night stuff, right? Something maybe like adding a little bit of intimacy, like sexual wise, or just like a date night. Like, how do we schedule in a date night this week? What would you like that to look like? Is that an at home date night or
Hmm.
in the bed of the truck eating burritos, quick date night? Or do we have childcare and maybe we can have like a nice long date in extra sexy time? So
Hmm.
I really like to have these weekly meetings. I always recommend doing it over snacks. I think snacks that
Yes.
just make meetings better. It certainly makes my partner show up for these
Yep.
meetings. Um, but again, setting aside that time just kind of as you would like we do it a lot with our work lives, like be that
Mhm.
intentional about things in our work lives, why not do that with our relationships?
Hmm. Yeah. And I highly agree with the weekly check-in. I think that there's many guys out there. You mentioned you have one. I know I have one. I just picked up the Inner Work of Relationships book on Amazon. There's one in there. So many, but I like specifically starting with the emotional side of it because as you mentioned earlier, that vulnerability being such a key piece of intimacy. When you start with the emotional side, that gives you that space to kind of go a little bit deeper. Because I think oftentimes too with parents, especially parents with kids, it can get into just very, very automatic, right? Like very, how was your day? Good. Okay, cool. Well, here's what we got to do, right? It's like jumping into the next
Hmm.
thing. And
Hmm.
also when you were coming up, I think the word priority comes up. So really prioritizing your marriage as its own unit, right? Like you have yourself, you have your kids, and then you have your marriage, like just the two of you, and then I would say the whole family, right? And so I think a lot of people differ on where priority like lies for them is like who is the number one priority in their life? Is it their self? Is it their kid? Is their partner?
Hmm.
And right, I think that could be probably a whole other conversation. I really
Right,
love the book Hunt,
right.
Gather, Parent for that. But
Uh-huh.
that's a good one. But again, I think what I'm trying to get here is again being intentional and actually making marriage a priority to where you are setting time aside and you are again pouring into that because yeah, these check-ins for us, you would if you just start with the emotional stuff and me, I'm a pretty type A person, so I love the scheduling. I love the all right, where we got to be, what do we got to do sort
Hmm.
of conversation. But the emotional side of it, it's like we can get down for hours talking about some of that. It's like once that safety is created, that vulnerability is there, it's like I
Hmm.
feel that is when for me I feel the closest to my partner.
Hmm.
Because I feel that safety, that closeness that I can go there and be held in that space by him.
Absolutely. And just, I mean, to not, like you said, talking about prioritization can be a whole discussion in itself. But I think having these times set aside where you are being vulnerable, you are being open with one another, it allows you to talk about the prioritization and how that shifts. I think it's okay for that to shift. Like some weeks, maybe your kids are sick, and that is going to be the top priority is like getting these kids well. And then
Mhm.
there's some weeks where you're just swamped at work, and it's like, hey, babe, so sorry. This is my priority this week. I got to get this done. But when you have these meetings, I think it gives you the space to say, again, when we were talking about the emotional part, if you feel like, I feel like we're lacking on prioritizing the relationship side, that's a good
Mhm.
chance to be able to bring that up and say, okay, how do we make our relationship more of a priority this week?
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, and if you had like if somebody is listening to this and they're feeling like they're in that space of just kind of being in a rut, that stuck space where sex hasn't really been happening, maybe they're feeling disconnected to their partner, where would you start? What would be your advice for them to start?
Oh, good question. I think because it goes so this
Mhm.
question it brings up so many things for me,
Mhm.
right? Because I think desire is a huge piece too, and I
Yeah.
think for a lot of people they think, well, yeah, we can schedule it, but it's like I don't even have the desire to do that. So like, and you might think I have to be in the perfect headspace for that to even happen, and how am I going to get myself in the right headspace? So I think well, like first steps are just like getting to know yourself sexually and getting some education on desire and what your experience of desire is. Like, I'm sure you know this, right?
Mhm.
That people experience desire differently. And a lot of folks experience what we call responsive desire.
Mhm.
And when you experience responsive desire, and a lot of times this is moms, just because statistically a lot of times it's folks who are assigned female at birth or who are socialized as women, experience responsive desire. And so we need that stimulus for us to respond sexually. And we also need the willingness to get ourselves to that place, right?
Mhm.
Again, it's like, and I'm sure you've heard this metaphor too, right? Some people heat up like ovens and some people heat up like microwaves. And so if you're somebody who notices in your relationship you haven't been prioritizing that part of the relationship. You haven't been prioritizing sex and intimacy in that way. I think it takes time to know yourself. Okay, well, how do I experience desire if I'm realizing that I need all these things to line up in order for me to feel desirous? How do I set myself up so that those things can be in alignment? How do I make sure the dishes are out of the sink and the kids are asleep and this is happening and this is happening? And how do I turn myself on
Hmm.
so that I'm really enjoying the experience and it's not just, again, a to do or a check off?
Hmm.
So I think that's like the first major part is really understanding your experience of desire. So that way, then you can kind of schedule and be intentional about it.
Hmm. Which I also think is a great opportunity for a couple to, again, go down that road of vulnerability and to share that with each other. A lot of people don't know, right? Spontaneous versus responsive desire. And for a couple, I think to be able to have that conversation from that place of openness and empathy and curiosity, it just helps normalize that, right? It's very unlikely that we're both going to be turned on at the exact same time. And then incorporating,
Mm-hmm.
right, something like that check-in, it's like, okay, so if we know that Wednesday night kids are going to be at grandpa's house, right? Like, okay, what I know for me, like I'm gonna need the dishes to be done. It's hard for me to get into bed when I like know that the kitchen is a hot mess express. So it's like, can
Mm-hmm.
we, right now we're both on the same page with what the expectation is. I mean, not saying that you
Mm-hmm.
have to do the dishes, maybe even better if I come, into the kitchen, voila, it's finished. But I just know for me, right, like that's gonna be a thing. I know I'm gonna want to shower beforehand, perhaps, right? Like you, again, you
Mm-hmm.
know this checklist in your head. And then
Mm-hmm.
again, it's like both people are on the same page. And when it comes to desire too, I think it's important for us to mention it's our responsibility to take ownership for our own sexuality. It takes away
Mm-hmm.
our power if we put it onto our partner that they need to be the one that gets us turned on or they need to be the one that right does X, Y, and Z. It's like, no, it like you said, what can I do to turn myself on, to get myself into that space? Um, and then do that because you're worthy of that. You deserve to have pleasure. You deserve to have better than
Mm-hmm.
just check the box sex.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I love that. Yes, everybody is responsible for their own experience of pleasure. Absolutely.
Mhm. Yeah. So, with you in being, again, a parent yourself, do you find that there has been some good that has come from you having conversations like this with other moms in your circle?
I think mostly it's the normalization of different experience that other moms face, right?
Mhm.
Like in particular, I think what stands out most is like we're talking about sex after pregnancy loss. I think pregnancy loss in
Mhm.
particular is something that we just don't talk about, even though it is so incredibly common, right? We know 1 in 4 pregnancies end in loss, like 1 in 4 women experience, excuse me, 1 in 4 women experience pregnancy loss. So we know it's incredibly common, but it's something we don't really talk about.
Mhm.
And then thinking about sex afterwards while you might be grieving is something even like a further layer down of things that we don't talk about. So I think just being open with my own experience allows other moms in particular to
Mhm.
be more open. I also think there's a lot of pressure on moms to do all the things, right? Like I saw this quote recently, like we expect moms to mother like they don't work and work like they don't mother,
Mhm.
right? They're expected to do all
Mhm.
these things. And when you think about also the relationship expectations that are
Yeah.
on moms and in particular and folks socialized as women, right? There, women tend to be the carriers of the weight of the relationship as far as like socialization and like a lot of invisible workload around the home. And so I think talking with other moms and like normalizing that we're just juggling a whole lot of stuff. And it's
Mhm.
like, I call it like dishes, diapers, and deadlines, right? How am I supposed to be thinking about sex when I have a sink full of dishes, diapers everywhere, and work deadlines, right? So
Mhm.
really just normalizing that experience and helping other parents realize like they are not alone. This is a lot to carry. And it's okay if no one particular thing is the priority at a particular moment.
Hmm. Yeah. And again, I think the normalization around not, those aren't excuses. Those aren't excuses that women give or just people in general give, right? Like that's real life. And that's where that emotional vulnerability conversation comes into play too. And I like what you mentioned earlier, like, was there any unresolved stuff that came up? And I think that comes with a lot, like generally the woman, the mom in the group in the relationship balancing so many things. There's a good book on this, Fair Play. There's a game associated with it, which I often recommend for clients. So it just gives them that visual picture of like, okay, this is for me, like I am actually doing a lot more than I realized. And then for the partner to see that as well.
Hmm.
Um, and then yeah, to ask for help. Like this is a relationship takes two people to have the conversation, two people to have the sex, right? Like two people to do. I guess
Hmm.
you of course could have solo sex too, but that's yeah,
Sure.
you get what I'm saying here.
Or more than two.
Yes, or more than two. Yeah.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah. And like the thing about asking for help, right? It's not necessarily like asking for help because just the mom or whoever is carrying more of the load needs help personally, but it's like no, like the family needs help. Our
mhm,
whole unit needs help. Like I need you to help contribute to the unit.
mhm,
We're
mhm.
in this together.
Yeah. Yeah. In that the inner work of relationships book with their check-in, some of the questions are, well, one of the questions is how did we do with our intimacy the previous week, and able to have a
Mm.
conversation around that. But then I also like how did one of the other ones is how did we do with our friendship this past week, which
Oh, I
is
like
I
that.
think is a good one too, because then it's not, again, like you said earlier, it's not just about sex. There's a whole scope to this relationship. And oftentimes when we can focus on some of those other things that might be falling to the wayside, that makes us more available for intimacy. And then vice versa, when we are in that state of, the flow sex where things are going well, it's feeling like it's coming natural. It just seems that everything else in life just starts to flow a little bit easier as well.
Hmm. Hmm.
But yeah, it's like which comes first, the chicken or the egg is often the conversation.
Right.
Yeah.
Both hands.
Yes, yes, yes. Oh, all right, Dr. Holly, thank you so much for coming on. Is there any resources that you want to mention, any things that you want to share for listeners that you have? You mentioned that you have a website, anything that you want to plug here for listeners?
Sure. I mean, you've mentioned a lot of really great resources. So I guess just in addition to those, some things I'm really loving right now is the book called Desire. So that one's really good if you're looking to explore desire and if you're in a relationship in which there's a difference of desire. I think that one's really good. If you are a new parent, got the Gottman's Bringing Baby Home, I think is really helpful. As far as resources from myself, people can reach me at thehollywoodsexologist.com and across all social media platforms, Instagram, YouTube, everywhere at The Hollywood Sexologist.
Mhm. Awesome. Thank you again so much for coming on the show and sharing your personal experience as well as so many helpful things for listeners. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you again for
Mhm.
having me.